Again, thank you all for being here with us this afternoon and spending some of your lunch hour learning a little more about climate and sustainability planning. So here is our agenda for today. Run through a quick welcome, session introductions. We have a great group of panelists for you today to kind of dig a little deeper into this topic, and then we'll wrap up with Q&A and then closing and some next steps. So we are excited actually to have a nationwide audience here today to learn more about this. For those of you that are outside of our region, Centralina Regional Council is a member-based organization for local governments within 9 counties that make up the Greater Charlotte region. We offer a neutral platform for local governments that have chosen to come together and collaborate on shared topics. Our mission is to lead collaboration and spark local action to expand opportunity and improve quality of life. One of those ways we do that is by offering these type of trainings by professional planners and others on issues relevant to our communities. Centralina Learns is a professional development resource to enhance our knowledge and skills on important issues, provide AICP credits, and opportunities for peer learning. And with that, we have an offering of AICP credits today. Those will be shared in the follow-up email with this later this week. So just to kind of get things off and going, we would like to poll the group on where you're joining us from today. Like I said, it's a nationwide audience, so we're curious, and how familiar you are with climate planning. So we're gonna give everyone a little bit to pop those answers in. Just give everyone a few more seconds. All right. So we have most people within the North Carolina, within our region. Like I said, welcome to those outside the region. I think we have some great information to share with you all as well today, and slightly familiar. Okay. Oh, very familiar. Nice. Well, we will go ahead and get started then. So, like I said, I am Megan Upchurch. I am our host and moderator today. I am a regional planner here with Centralina Regional Council, and I am also the director of our Centralina Clean Fuels Coalition, which is a program supported through the Department of Energy that focuses on alternative fuels. We do a lot of education, outreach, and technical assistance related to that topic. Additionally, we have a great panel for you today. We have Erin Stanforth with Mecklenburg County. She is the Sustainability and Resiliency Manager there. Michelle Nance, the Deputy Executive Director with Centralina Regional Council, and Jason Wager, our Regional Planning Director here at Centralina Regional Council. So just to kind of kick things off, wanted to dig into kind of the topic that we all are here today, and then also let the panelists take it further from there. So starting off, what is climate planning? It's essentially mitigating future climate change through the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions while also adapting, our built and natural environment to changes already taking place or anticipated to take place in the future. We're seeing a lot more of this topic being discussed in more recent years, and we as planners work at the intersection of transportation, development, and land use, which are sectors that are the most critical to climate mitigation and adaptation. And while there is not a one-size-fits-all for this approach for communities, we can all work together in kind of finding those best fits through the planning process that we're all pretty familiar with. So for today, key definitions: climate mitigation, climate adaptation, and resilience. So those are 3 very important definitions of the conversation today. And I know throughout conversation, some people are curious what's the difference between climate adaptation and climate mitigation, which is essentially climate mitigation addresses the root of the problem, but requires a broad base of adaptation and acceptance. On a global scale, for it to be more effective, climate adaptation addresses more of the symptoms of climate change and can be effective at the local scale. So here's kind of climate planning and our region, which is Charlotte and the greater Charlotte region. These are all kind of key pieces that show the effects of the changing climate in our area. The one of which is the Charlotte skyline is actually from the wildfires from Canada over the summer to kind of show that haziness, and also that, it's not always within your local or regional. It's looking at this at multiple scales. We do see a lot with flooding in our area, especially as the state of North Carolina as a whole. But even we're more inland, and we still see a lot of this flooding throughout the area. Another concern in thinking in the future is we have a lot of agricultural lands in our region. So kind of how that might change over the years and how we effectively work to plan for those changes. And then, like any large city, traffic is a thing around here. We all seen it. Even if you're not from the Charlotte region, any city that you've seen, I'm sure you're well aware this picture is not unfamiliar to you of, just cars after cars, and then the bicyclist, passing you and stops traffic. So all of those are kind of the things that go into a lot of carbon emissions in our area. So there are ways to kind of think about the reduction of it, whether it's programs like LEED certification through the US Green Building Council, thinking about maybe more transportation demand management programs. There's a range of sustainability practices that we can incorporate and look to when developing these climate plans. So on that, APA in July of 2020 came out with 7 principles of climate planning. So these are essentially the responses to the growing need for communities to simultaneously mitigate and adapt to changes and impacts of climate change. So this was something that they sat down and really worked through how to kind of bring those together as we continue to further dig into the type of planning process that goes into specifically focusing on the climate side of this. And then to follow that up, what is the role of planners? We're used to going out in the world, and we're used to long range plans, small area plans, transportation plans. We are in a world of plans. So really getting out and using our expertise and actually, working in the community, working with a broad range of individuals to really dig in and start having not only having these conversations, but thinking about what the future of our communities look like, mobilizing and also putting plans into strategies, into implementations. So this can be conversations around the reduction of sprawl, like I said, transportation demand management, on the vehicle miles traveled side of things, and a range of other impacts to our environment. So with that overview, I'm going to pass it along to Erin Stanforth with Mecklenburg County to dig a little deeper into this topic.
Thanks, Megan. I appreciate that. Sorry for my voice. I don't have COVID. I'm not sick. It's just allergies. And I did want to kind of kick us off and maybe level set everyone. So Mecklenburg County as an entity, we're quite large. There's 1.2 million residents in our county as a whole. I approached this discussion through the lens of not necessarily just greenhouse gas emissions, but also I wanted to talk about our just kind of operations within the county, and then also some responsible land management practices. So we're going to go to the next slide. Excuse me. Awesome. So that's perfect. Okay, so In March of 2021, our Board of County Commissioners passed our first Environmental Leadership Action Plan. And that action plan is intended to be a roadmap towards carbon neutrality, along with a whole host of other issues is covered within both the action plan and the policy. I didn't want to list the policy, for it is quite verbose and a bit boring. No offense to anyone on this call. So we attempted to make the policy kind of fit within the confines of what's listed here, but everything that you see here is covered within our updated environmental leadership policy. Go to the next slide, please. Thanks. So Environmental Leadership Action Plan, or ELAP, as we lovingly refer to it, is organized into 4 sections: facilities and fleet, operations, natural environment, policies and partnerships. I always like to read aloud when we're talking about the ELAP. Excuse me. Be it further resolved that an affiliated environmental leadership action plan guide the activities of county government such that the county may take results-oriented steps and align operations in support of current and future pollution reduction, resource conservation, and climate preparedness initiatives. Go to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned, our ELAP, which is our implementation roadmap towards carbon neutrality, is organized into 4 sections: facilities and fleet, operations, natural environment, and policies and partnerships. Now, there's a lot of stuff included within the ELAP. So the purposes for this discussion, I wanted to hone in on both the facilities and fleet section, as well as the natural environment section, because again, recognizing that climate preparedness is not just about greenhouse gas emissions, it's about best management practices across our environment. We have to keep into account impacts on our community in terms of maintaining our landscape, ensuring that there's not congestion and development on every single square inch of our county, but we'll get into that. If you go to the next slide, please. So that's a bit small, apologies for that. So I wanted to kick us off with facilities and fleet. So a big difference between FY22 and FY23, surprisingly, our energy use intensity, our EUI, in FY23 was nearly identical to FY22. And while this doesn't seem like much progress, throughout FY22, we had most of our employees working from home because of COVID. And so once we moved into FY23, there was about a 4-month time period where all employees, there's over 6,000 folks employed by the county, were full-time in the office 5 days a week. And yet our EUI stayed the same, which I think is attributed to a whole host of energy efficiency projects that we tackled over the last few fiscal years. You see a summation of that on kind of the beige side of this slide. Also, in FY22, our water use totaled over 224,000 cubic feet. Well, in FY23, our water use totaled over 250,000 cubic feet. Interestingly, this increase can be attributed to a few different things. 1, we opened a new regional rec center. 2, we have a new, I'm going to say, installation within our portfolio called our Town Place Suites. Both of those came online. And then we also had full occupation of 2 different community resource centers that were not in full occupation prior to FY23. And so those came fully online. And just as an aside, and not necessarily as an aside, but intended to be really transparent about the intricacies of government and the things that we are responsible for. We also had 2 water leaks, both at one of our parks, Ramsey Creek Park, as well as our 4 Mile Creek Greenway. So all of those reasons combined leads us to why our water use went up so significantly. If we go to the next slide in FY22 versus 23, thank you. So right now we have over 13,000 vehicles in our fleet. About 4% of those are EVs. You may be wondering, why do you have 1,300 vehicles in your fleet? The county provides a whole host of services to our residents, and that does include a lot of transportation around to our various locations that we own and operate, but then also there's a lot of house calls made within our Department of DSS, Department of Social Services, and then also our just community resource centers in general. There's a lot of our child care workers and social workers that travel from kind of our home bases out into communities. So there's a lot of just traveling throughout the county. And I will say, we're trying to be really intentional with what vehicles we're replacing when, meaning we do have a lot of vehicles. We also have a lot of newer vehicles because the mileage that are attributed to each of those. So we're working to figure out the best way to replace vehicles in addition to life cycle of them. I'm happy to talk more online or offline about that if interested. I will say, because we became at full capacity, everybody was in person in FY23, our gasoline consumptions or unleaded fuel did increase by an average of about 80 gallons. And again, this can be attributed to being fully in person. If we go down to our next slide. So moving into air quality, and Megan lovingly, interestingly put this together. She said that air is not necessarily just within the county, within the city, within a neighborhood. It's everywhere, right? We can control it, but only so much. I will say in FY23, we continue to meet our federal air quality health standard at 64 parts per billion. Throughout FY23, we have this program called GRADE, grants to replace aging diesel engines. And throughout FY23, that program worked to, reduce our diesel particulate pollution by over 1,200 tons of diesel, which is amazing. And in FY23, so we had 9 air quality action days. What's an air quality action day? Those are days that where our air quality ranking is at an orange level or higher. You kind of see that 5-tiered system at the bottom of this slide. We do recommend for staff members that can work from home to work from home on those dates, or if they have to be in the office, don't necessarily drive from their office to lunch, or try to do as many virtual meetings as they can. And so because we did have such intense air quality issues because of wildfires that were happening in FY23, we did have a lot of air quality action days, the most we've ever had. That being said, we also had a significant amount of people that contributed to not commuting on those days. And so we do have a program within the county that's intended, it's called Work Green. It's intended to award people that work to reduce their impact on the environment within the confines of their offices, along as at their homes. And so for the first time ever, we had over 400 people that participated in those air quality action days, which is pretty amazing. And also as a result of that, all those folks that were commuting to the office, were commuting cleanly. We had over 350,000 miles logged that were emission-free throughout FY23. So that's really, really exciting. Next slide, please. I did want to highlight just briefly one of our projects in that GRADE program. Estes, their express line. So we worked to replace 7 of their semi-trucks with more efficient trucks. And over the next 5 years, which is about the life cycle of those vehicles, will reduce nearly 17 tons of nitrous oxide, which is amazing. And since the program was established in 2007, we have distributed over $8 million in grants. And that's also resulted in a reduction of not only carbon dioxide, but nitrous oxide by over 1,200 tons. So I want to transition briefly into if you go to the next slide, our natural environment. So I wanted to highlight briefly some successes as well as challenges throughout the second year of our Stormwater Department's capital improvement program. Go to the next slide, please. So in FY23, we restored 3 miles of streams and we acquired 10 flood-prone properties. What's a flood-prone property? These are properties that are highly likely to flood if and when another 100-year flood occurs. And we also mitigated nearly 10,000 flood risk points. What's a flood risk point? I am not a water professional, nor do I claim to be, but I do love to learn. And so we recently learned that flood risk points equates, our stormwater department assigns flood risk points to various properties and projects based on their level of severity when it comes to flooding. And so the greater the risk of flooding, the higher the value of those points. And so we did reduce flood risk points by nearly 10,000, which is a component of our capital improvement process. If we go to the next slide. So something that I failed to start off with this, and so I apologize for that. Our environmental leadership action plan, as well as our environmental leadership policy, there's no way that either of those things could have come to fruition without our environmental stewardship committee. That is a committee to our Board of County Commissioners. It's chaired by one of our fantastic county commissioners in District 1, Commissioner Powell, and then she has 3 other commissioners that are a part of that committee. And so that committee, along with staff support, has really pushed and also educated, frankly, our other commissioners, as well as community members and staff, about the importance of land acquisition and land preservation. You'll see on this, the map portion of this slide, that's a map of the county, obviously. Everything, and you may not be able to read the legend, and that's apologies for that. Everything that's red, those little red dots, those are properties, parcels that the county acquired during FY23. They are intended to be green and open space. And then everything that's a little yellow triangle, those are easements that have been purchased in FY23. On the bottom pie chart, that's a breakdown of what our acres looked like in FY23. We acquired nearly 500 acres in FY23, totaling over $51 million, which is truly incredible. Of these acres, 100 of those acres were nature preserves, which you see here on this pie chart. Over 36 were greenways, and over 362 acres were parkland. And so I will say, in addition to ensuring that development isn't necessarily stopped, but is taken into consideration when folks are trying to develop our open and green spaces throughout the county. That's a big push for this land acquisition work. But then also, we, within the Environmental Leadership Action Plan, are committed to maintaining a rate of 19 acres of open and green space per 1,000 residents. If you go to the next slide, that's a really interesting, I guess, process, because can the county control how many parcels we own? Absolutely. But can we control how many people move to Mecklenburg County? No, we cannot. However, in FY22, we maintained a rate of 19.1 acres per 1,000 residents. In FY23, that number actually increased to 19.2 acres per 1,000 residents. And yes, that doesn't seem like a huge amount, but in trying to assess what happened in FY22 population-wise, FY23 population-wise, then how many acres we acquired during those 2 sets of time, that 0.01% increase actually accounts for 500 additional acres of parkland, which doesn't seem like much when you're looking at the percentage, but frankly, it's a whole lot of land that we're really proud of that. If we can go to the next slide, kind of keeping in that natural environment space. So another thing that our Environmental Stewardship Committee and our board has been very committed to is ensuring invasives are not taking over these parcels that we're acquiring. We do have a very active Park and Recreation Department, and in FY23, we removed over 1,000 acres worth of invasive species, which is a decrease from FY22, which you can see in that kind of darker blue box above the dominant species list. In FY23, and the reason for that is we focused our energy on properties that showed high densities of invasives, multiple species of invasives, and difficult to access areas. And while, yes, there's a decrease in acres treated, there was a more, I don't want to say effective treatment, but more long-lasting treatment. An example of this, if you go to the next slide, is so these are 3 separate photos from the exact same space at one of our preserves at Lada. Lada is a nature preserve that we have within our portfolio. We started treating autumn olive, that's the invasive. We began the treatment in 2020. You can see on that far left, the darker green, that's before we applied anything to the autumn olive. In the middle, you can see that is a post-mechanical, like physical treatment, treatment and then removal of those invasives. And then after the physical treatment, removal of those invasives happen, then we have to do another foliar treatment. So like chemicals and burning, if that's appropriate, to that same site. And so you see here, this spans 3 years. And while, yes, we are definitely committed to ensuring that our invasives are treated, we are funded on a fiscal year basis. And so the funding we've had to kind of stretch when we're talking about spaces like this within the confines of our portfolio. If we could go to the next slide. And so keeping in that same vein of natural environment, we've been utilizing prescribed fire as one of our tools to remove/control invasives. In the top left, you'll see that, so this is actually in the same park that you saw before, Lada. We actually used the trail, one of the trails within Lada, as a fire break when we were treating in FY23. And then you see the gentleman to the right is in a different preserve, yet still using prescribed fire as a way to control invasives. And in FY23, we treated nearly 700 acres with prescribed fire. And so you might be asking, why are you telling us about invasives and prescribed fire and all of those things? What I'm trying to convey is, one, when we're talking about climate preparedness, it's not just emissions, it's not just traffic, it's much broader than that. And I think that all the different actions that are included, at least in the county's environmental leadership action plan, we've intentionally included them because they contribute to the larger well-being of our overarching environment. Not that greenhouse gas emissions aren't important, they very much are, but I did want to highlight some things that aren't necessarily emission specific. And if you go to the last slide, yes. Okay, so I'm gonna stop talking. I don't think we're taking questions yet. I might be wrong in that, but happy to chat online or offline about anything I shared. And thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Erin. We really appreciate that. And that is, as you can see, there's so much great work that's happening on the local scale. So we'd like to transition just a little to the regional scale. And Megan, if you can advance the slides a couple, that would be great. So the question is, why are we even talking about this at the regional scale? There's a lot of good reasons for it. First of all, the opportunity to integrate and improve our transportation and mobility networks. We all know that those do not stop at the political boundary. We do have a regional transit plan that we think will be really important as far as this project goes. But when you think about those things, those are on the regional scale. Also, local and regional economic development strategies related to clean energy jobs and workforce training. We know that our labor force moves every day across the region. And so those things are also regional. And when you look at, clean buildings and fleets and waste management, those are practices that we need to be able to share on a regional scale. And then thinking about, ensuring readiness for the electric grid shifts. And of course, tracking that implementation progress across the communities using some common metrics. So there's a lot of reasons why we should be looking at this regionally. And to that end, let's go to the next slide. In August, Centralina Regional Council received a $1 million planning grant, which is going to provide funding for our region to work together to develop some shared strategies. And what are these strategies going to be about? Really planning for and achieving some low-cost reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. So that's what it's all about. Looking at creating some economic growth and job creation in the low carbon economy, and then achieving substantial public health co-benefits. So there's reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but there's so many things that come along with that. And so we want to make sure that we lift up those co-benefits that often are very important for low income and disadvantaged communities, especially. And now, ultimately, why are we doing this? We need to have this plan in place so that our communities will be eligible for the 4.6 billion in competitive implementation funds that is now available and on the street. Some of the key dates: February 1st, if you want to go for an implementation grant, the letter of intent is due. On March 1st, the first part of our climate action planning, which is the priority action plan, will be due. And then in April 1st, the implementation grants are due. Now, I want to just highlight, in order to submit an implementation grant, the strategy, or as EPA calls it, the measure, has to be included in the priority climate action plan that's due March 1st. As you can see, this work is going to go on in parallel. As planners, we typically first do a plan and then we implement. I just want to say, here we're being asked to do more of a strategic plan. So looking at those implementation ready initiatives first, and then perhaps applying to get funding for those projects. And then we'll be doing a more comprehensive effort that will focus on broad regional stakeholder engagement as part of the comprehensive climate action plan. Next slide. So where does this take place? The state of North Carolina and the state of South Carolina are working on a statewide climate action plan. Centralina is one of 3 recipients in North Carolina, and we will focus on the specific needs of our communities within the geography you see here, which is in the dark green. That is the MSA, the Metropolitan Statistical Area, designated by the census, which we are required to include as part of this project. That includes 8 counties in North Carolina and 3 in South Carolina. So again, we're one of those bi-state regions for this project. Also added on are Cleveland County and Stanley County, because some of these projects and implementation measures will certainly be about transportation. And in order to make the transportation planning organizations whole in terms of their boundaries, Cleveland and Stanley are being added in. All right, next slide. So when we think about the outputs, like what are we actually going to get from this? First, we'll have the region's first climate action plan, including a baseline of where we sit right now with our greenhouse gas emissions. We'll also be developing a framework and a template of sorts for local climate action planning. So if you want to be able to pull down pieces of this and do this locally, we want to be able to build out that scale, build out the data that you will need to do this locally. Now, outcomes, a lot of outcomes. I won't go over all of them here, but just know that some of it will be about education. We'll be creating some technical expertise, building that capacity within the region to do this type of work, both on a technical scale and also, as you know, equity is very important in everything that we do as planners, but making sure that we have in this region a group of what we're calling equity advisors. Who are those folks out in the region that really have the pulse of the low income and disadvantaged communities in the region? Folks that we need to be able to reach and we need to be able to hear from, not just for this project, but lots of projects. So building that network is of vital importance, and we'll be able to do it through this grant process. All right, next slide. So as noted, Centralina is leading the planning process for the MSA, but we are really pleased to have lined up a really strong list of partners for this work. First, we'll be partnering with the Catawba Regional Council of Governments. They will be doing the engagement on the South Carolina side of the border. So all the things that we're doing on the North Carolina side, that will be replicated on the South Carolina side through our sister COG. We're also partnering with the Mecklenburg County Air Quality and UNC Charlotte for some technical assistance around the sciencey stuff with the greenhouse gas emissions. And then we've also met with partners from the state in terms of like the Division of Air Quality, the Energy Office, and the Governor's Office. And then we're doing some coordination with our sister COG up in the Triangle area, the Central Pines Regional Council. So all these plans will be have different components, but where there are areas for commonality, we're certainly going to make sure that that is aligned. All right, next slide. So just as a real high level baseline, the climate pollution reduction planning effort really comes in 3 parts. So we'll have a priority climate action plan, which is very near term, and it's going to be those short-term strategies. The comprehensive climate action plan will add on a lot more. So it'll be a much more robust plan that really charts our path forward in terms of economic development and workforce opportunities, but it's also going to give us an opportunity to look at the greenhouse gas projections, maybe some targets, and then those long-term strategies that we can use to leverage federal funds for this type of work. And that goes through 2025. Seems like a long time. It'll be here before we know it. And then in 2027, we've got to show EPA, like, so what have you done? Hopefully you got some implementation money. What did you do? Where do you sit now? So we're really looking forward to that. Next slide. This is just a reminder of the timelines. So these slides will be available to you. So this is one you might want to be coming back to. Really just shows you that, March 1st, priority action plan is due. April 1st, the implementation grants due, and then We'll be back. We'll be back to talk about the comprehensive action plan more in the future. So just know that that'll be done through 2025, and then a status report in 2027. All right, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Jason Wager to go into a bit more detail on the climate action planning.
Thank you, Michelle, and really appreciate kind of all the information that's been shared so far. As I think you're seeing the case being built as we go through this today. While this tends to be, greenhouse gas emissions and climate planning tends to be a fairly global conversation or thought of at that level, it's very much local as well. Some great examples right here in Mecklenburg County, which I have no doubt are replicated in many of the counties around, all the counties around our region, whether it be stormwater, flooding issues, transportation, congestion challenges, you name it. These are all things that we hope to marry those local challenges with this opportunity. And that's really what I want to take just a few minutes to do, is start talking about not just the climate planning efforts, but how we weave those into actionable, implementable activities. And as you've already heard a bit from Michelle, we've got a bit of a dance to do between now and March 1st. There will be a very quick turnaround to essentially set ourselves up for success. On the previous slide, I think one key takeaway for me, and I made sure to check this in the notice of funding opportunity for implementation grants. It's a one-time round. There won't be a second round to come back to, 2 years from now or something like that. So we really got to get our ideas out on the table and have some really, deep conversations, but move quickly and as efficiently as possible. And then, as was mentioned, talking a bit about this, the PCAP, as we call it, the Priority Climate Action Plan. This is where we have to merge those ideas with the planning work. If you want to put in for an April 1st application, you're going to have that project incorporated into the PCAP. So I won't necessarily go through each of those steps. You can read them here on the slide. But this is where we dive in a bit and want to make sure that if someone wants to apply for something later, it gets included here. Let's go to the next slide. And so with the approach, just a bit more, you can see some of the categories that are captured. I want to make sure I use my words carefully. We want to make sure we do this well. We've got certainly some topics that we've got to cover, but what is becoming increasingly clear to me is because we'll have to move quickly, we do not and will not be able to get this perfect. Fortunately, the process, as you've heard, we have the ability to come back to the comprehensive climate planning action plan, to come back and further define and flesh out what we want to do for our region at a very fundamental planning level in terms of measurement and seeing reductions, seeing benefits provided through our efforts. That said, this is where we set it up. So this really means that combination of partners that Michelle mentioned, technical experts coming together, as well as some engagement will be upcoming in short order, again, from technical perspectives to equity perspectives, and simply community by community, what are those projects that are top of mind that folks are interested in going after? And you can see some of the areas that we're expected to cover through our planning. So again, that's March 1st, 2024. If you haven't heard it once, you'll probably hear it 10 times on this presentation. Let's go to the next slide. I talked a little bit about engagement. Really, we talk about who are we talking about? Technical folks, equity folks. We'll have, of course, employee consultants and subawardees you've heard about, all in the vein of educating stakeholders, those outputs that Michelle mentioned, and ultimately refining our approach, all again in short order through this engagement work. And our hope really, while we have to move quickly, our hope is to get going here in the next month on gathering who are the folks around the table that need to be there, and actually asking as we get people together, who else needs to be around the table. So really getting everyone's help in pulling together the discussion. And we'll share at the end of, in just a couple minutes, an additional way to get ideas in before we even come to any engagement sessions. Next slide. So I did mention the Comprehensive Climate Action Plan. As Michelle mentioned, this will be here before we know it. So we certainly want to set ourselves up for success. But what we will have is that kind of period from spring of this coming year to summer of 2025 to further dive into these topic areas. Very similar, as you can imagine, to the Priority Climate Action Plan, but just a deeper dive and a little bit more analysis around the data will take place, as well as being sure that we're incorporating these features you see here. Also, if we go to the next slide, this is not meant to be, the exact list of categories that we will necessarily go after for our region, as much as these are some examples. And as you go to the EPA website and look up their notice of funding opportunity, these are the major buckets that they talk about and give some examples of projects. So if that's something that's of interest to anyone, I believe it's around page 9 of that notice of funding opportunity. And we will share the link here at the end for the EPA website. But certainly would give folks a chance to see what are those example projects and ideas that we might pursue. Again, very much items and activities we see and experience locally. And I think that, at the end of the day, you're probably gathering it quite a bit here. And we'll talk about the scoring in just a moment of how they'll look at this, look at proposals. But it really is about how projects can reduce greenhouse gas emissions, as well as several other things. But the real weight in the scoring is around those emission reduction activities. So making sure that, yes, it's a local project, but it also has that impact is going to give the best chance of being funded. All right. And by the way, we can include multiple sectors. So want to make sure that's clear. While we don't have to go after all sectors, we also can go after more than one as we refine what we want to propose for our region. All right, next slide. Looking at the funding tiers, you can see over to the far right the anticipated number of awards that they'll give out nationally. So essentially the full range across all those tiers are 30 to 115 awards, ranging from basically 2 million to 500 million in size. And so that just gives you a sense that, that's a lot, and we would certainly hope to be funded in our region. It is a competitive round and a round of funding, so we will need to put our best foot forward. Let's see. I want to talk just briefly about eligibility. Let's go to the next slide. And as you can see here, really two types of applications. One is for individual applicants. So this is really municipalities, or as you can see, regional organizations comprised of multiple municipalities. So MPOs come to mind there. And then, of course, we could, at Centralina, as the grant lead, we could apply as an individual applicant. As an alternative, there are what the EPA is referred to as coalition applications. So this is where 2 or more eligible applicants come together, and we look at basically through an MOA process, ensuring that implementation occurs in a concerted fashion. We'll need to evaluate this very quickly as we go over the next couple of months about the best approach for us. But what we do know is when you start looking at grants.gov and the SAM system and all the other activities that need to occur, we will need to seek out efficiencies. Having, dozens of applications from our region could be a bit cumbersome and challenging. So the sense is as much coordination as we can do, the better. And of course, you see that caveat at the bottom. If we put in for the same activity in the same geography, because we weren't necessarily coordinated or paying attention, that will be at least one proposal would be kicked out from consideration. So we want to be sure, if for no other reason, we're coordinating in that regard. All right. So I just mentioned that. Let's go now to the criteria. This to me blew me away. I saw 250 points when I heard about this, so that was interesting to me. A lot of criteria. I believe I counted over 30 pages, I believe, dedicated just to the scoring within the NOFO, so you can read all about it. But I would say on page 50, there's a table that does break these down, these sections down just a bit more. As no surprise, the biggest weight is given to the impact on greenhouse gas emissions. And literally, they refer to Goal 1, Objective 1.1 of the EPA Strategic Plan. Tackle the climate crisis is the goal, and reducing emissions that cause climate change is the objective. So that's really at the heart of that 60-point impact. But as has been mentioned, serious consideration to capacity and capability, your approach, the results, measures that you have in place to see that results are achieved. Low income and disadvantaged communities, a big element. And then you can see some of the other items that are looked at, including budget. And as we know, budget sounds simple now, but as you start pulling together projects and need to get cost estimates in to get these things accomplished, again, with a priority climate action plan due date of March 1st, and then an implementation grant due date of April 1st, this is going to come up quickly. With that, let's look at the next slide. Just again, a recap of some of the dates you've seen, but just shown in a slightly different way. So the climate planning work in green will continue all the way through March 1st. And any projects or measures that that anyone seeks to include from our region by the April 1st deadline for implementation grants, those projects or measures must be included in the priority climate action plan. So just quick reminder of those. The other takeaway, of course, is the timing on notification and funding award. So if all goes well and those anticipated dates are met, as early as this next fall, a year from now, folks would be off and running with implementation funding if it was received. So again, really quick, lots to get into. Finally, just a couple of next steps or ways to stay involved. If you can go to the next slide. So to learn more, you can see the EPA website. I think some of this is being pasted in the chat as well. Contact us. You heard from Megan at the top of the session today. Contact her by email if there's just something that you're having trouble with. But really would encourage folks to check out the form at the bottom of this slide. And again, should be linked in the chat. This is a chance to do two things, really. Number one is to signal your interest in being part of the conversation going forward. Also, to start placing ideas in to this form. It's fairly quick, shouldn't take too long to fill out, but things that you might want to pursue from your neck of the woods. So this is a way for us to just understand who's out there with what interests, understanding that in a perfect world, we would have many, many months for all kinds of engagement and time to digest and distill the information. Rather, this go around, we realize there will be a lot happening in parallel. So this is one of those parallel activities that will help us get a little jump start before we ever have any major regional event or discussion. And then finally, we'll share following today's session. You can see on the right just some screenshots. We've got a one-pager, two-sided one-pager summary that also has a link to the form that I just mentioned and just some more background things you've heard today that is maybe a little easier to share with your elected leaders, other stakeholders in the community that you might want to talk to about this opportunity. So with that, I think I wanted to just pause there and turn things back to Megan. I guess we've got a little time for any question and answer.
Thank you, Jason. And we do have a couple questions that want to lay out for you all. Let's start with, why is it so important to collaborate on climate planning at the regional level and coordinate local projects across jurisdictional boundaries?
Oh, well, we actually had a slide on that. Let's go back to, let me look. I think it really comes down to the fact that the activities that each community does in terms of whether it's transportation, whether it's how they get their energy, whether it's, when I say transportation, that's so broad. I mean, it's from what Aaron talked about in fleets, it's transit, it's the walkability of a community, it's, are you getting, EV ready? There's just so many components. Are you doing your trail system? There's just so many pieces that impact your neighbors. And working together on these issues is really going to be efficient from a government standpoint. Also, being able to just learn about things that people have already done, maybe that are ahead of you, and what worked, what didn't work. And, I don't see this as the last opportunity for this type of implementation grants. It is the last, it is, we do have one implementation grant that will be coming from EPA as part of CPRG. But having this baseline of information, of strategies, is only going to help us, this region, as we look at new funding opportunities. The fact that we can show we've thought about this, and this not only helps us on, areas A, B, and C, but by the way, it actually helps us on being a resilient region, being prepared for events and things that will come our way that we can't anticipate. I think that's only going to benefit us.
Jason or Aaron, do you want to chime in on that as well?
I think Michelle covered it really well, and I'll just underscore, once we get started in pulling together the systems and these conversations, as we're talking to more and more communities in the region, we're finding some repeat interests, and they may not have known that they had that shared interest. So once we're able to start implementing activities in one area, even if it's, after this round of funding has come and gone, the efficiencies that can be gained to replicate and scale these project ideas. Again, these are very often very local, meaningful needs and projects for communities. These are not pie in the sky things that you're going to, read about in a science magazine. These are very local needs, and so we can replicate and provide and really realize some efficiencies in deploying the projects and the programs over time. I don't know, Aaron, would you add anything that you're seeing in Mecklenburg County?
No, I think both you and Michelle summarized what's happening quite well. Thank you.
Well, Aaron, we have one for you. How has Mecklenburg County specifically built buy-in and brought partners along in their climate planning efforts? Any lessons learned from involving community members and centering environmental justice in the conversation?
Oh, that's a big question, Megan. Thank you. Well, from my perspective, lessons learned, start as early as you possibly can. And also recognize that, at least in our case, there's some mistrust between residents and the government. And so there's needs to be really intentional communication, a lot of transparency about what the initial ask is, and then how that ask feeds into whatever the long-term goal or project you have is. Consistent communication is a key, and all of these I'm referring to the external community with these examples. Also, and again, I've been in this role for almost 3 years now. Something that I think is a tool that, at least within our agency, sometimes we forget about are advisory boards. If you've got them, those are residents that are plugged into the community, are passionate about, insert whatever their focus of the board is. And if you can utilize them to really help you facilitate that buy-in, that's huge. And of course, last but not least, education. Not everyone is operating from the same level as a sustainability manager. And so I've had to check myself quite a few times in terms of, acronym speak, or assuming folks know things that I'm privy to as a government employee that's working in sustainability, but not everyone else is. So I would say, yeah, transparency, consistency, and recognizing that it's not a one size fits all, and always being as honest as you can be with these interactions.
Thank you for that. Jason, this is, I guess, more to you and Michelle, but Aaron, also feel free to chime in as well on your side of things. Beyond completing the form that you mentioned, Jason, what are some other first steps communities can take to go ahead and start getting involved in the regional efforts?
Yeah, I think simply taking a look at the background information we're sharing, understanding kind of the general tone, and what would score well on the project side or for these grants, but then reverse engineering that into what are the challenges happening locally that these funds could help support. Ideally, where you've not been able to fund projects and from any other source as well. This could be a real gap filler for some, where there's just not necessarily an eligible pot of dollars out there otherwise. And then I think the other thing, so in addition to starting to get those ideas together that are a good fit for these funds, who are those leaders? Aaron just mentioned, the committee members and other community members. Who are those leaders that need to be talked to or need to chime in? So sharing the form with them, we're getting their ideas and then submitting on their behalf, so that as we get to some engagement, we kind of have a starter list of contacts and of ideas to work from, to be sure that we've got a real good pulse for the region and what are those priority items and activities. And then, making sure that, we all can kind of not be the last call, but that second to last call as we're out and working around the region in communities. Again, it is not ideal, but we're gonna have to move really quickly. So any, kind of pre-staging of information and thoughts is only gonna be helpful later on.
Thank you, Jason. I just wanted to add in, this may not be the grant for a project that you've just been thinking about, because of the timeline. So be thinking about what plans are already in place, either through your MPO, even if you haven't done no sustainability planning, you may have done some work on the building efficiency in buildings. You may have done some work in looking at your fleets. You may not call it sustainability planning or climate planning, but kind of broaden your mind to think about what have you already been doing, what plans are already there. Your transportation planning organizations, they have plans. Where do those plans kind of overlap with other plans? So, Jason showed how many grants are going to be given across the nation and the competitiveness that we know will come with this, with all this money. They will be looking at where there is like major alignment. Okay, where you've already engaged a lot of stakeholders, where things are just coming together from an economic standpoint, from an environment standpoint, from an access and opportunity standpoint. So just be thinking about, what is it that really brings all that together?
Thank you both for that. We have one more for the group. I am not sure how supportive my community will be of climate or sustainability planning. What are some strategies that they can use to convey the importance of these efforts to stakeholders throughout their community?
Yep. Can I take a stab first, and then Michelle, you want to? So in calling a spade, right? We're in the South, at least where I am. And I'm a native North Carolinian, but I'm native to North Carolina, but I lived out west for 7 years in Portland, Oregon. So coming back was quite a culture shock. I think that framing the idea of sustainability and the idea of climate change in the confines of resiliency, adaptability, is crucial, especially in a really conservative environment. And fortunately, depending on how you look at it, sustainability and climate change are often political issues. And there's like that nuance about those specific terms. If you can reframe it to be about resiliency, to be about adaptability, to be about making your community more vibrant and more apt to handle things that are coming down the pike, I think that is a solid step forward.
Erin, that you're spot on. I've been talking with a lot of communities about this as part of our 55th anniversary road trip here at Centralina. And to the point of honesty, what I've often said is, every room that I'm in doesn't really want to hear about climate planning. But what they do want to hear about is how we can make our community better, and that we can add on to the things that we already want to do. So if we already want to do trails, if we already want to do sidewalks, if we already are looking at, some place-based, mobility, maybe some mobility hubs, even if it's not transit, walkability. Those are the types of things that if you're already wanting to do, then why not see how you can get that paid for? Right? And they're like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. So I think it's just being very clear about what the values are in each community and thinking about your messaging in terms of those values that are in place.
And I see we have an audience question. Commissioner Powell, go ahead.
Thank you. I had to unmute. I love what Erin and Michelle said. And for the audience, I am Elaine Powell, a Mecklenburg County Commissioner, and this is my 34th year of working on protecting natural resources. And so it's part of my core value. But through this work, because you're right, not like there are people that will just close their ears when you're talking about climate change, climate anything. And there's no need to even push that, because we all share the value of health and wellness. You know, like we want to live in healthy communities where there's a good quality of life. And that is not political. And when we were doing the work, and I'm showing my age, but when we were doing the work on Connect Our Future, I was in, I think, every meeting except maybe one. And when we were working with stakeholders who were so opposed to some of the protections initially, when we did this exercise, this build out on the map of the region of what it would take for the projected population growth, of what would happen to our critical watershed and what would happen to our green space and our tree canopy. When we did that, and we physically had to like figure out what to do with the population, and they saw the impact on the region, the stakeholders said no. And so when you looked at the priorities in Connect Our Future, they were health and wellness, environmental stewardship, and so language matters. And as part of our environmental leadership action plan, we have an environmental justice arm to make sure that we're hearing from everyone. We have a farmland preservation component and all the other things that Erin shared with you, but these are all about health and wellness and making the quality of life better for everyone. And we should get a big EPA grant because of all the work that has been done. And so I just want to be part of that with all the experience that I've had, because there is some resistance when you talk about it the wrong way, and we need to figure out how to talk about it a better way so that everyone's on board, because it matters for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Powell. So we have another one for Michelle and Jason, specifically on, there are a couple of these efforts going on within the state of North Carolina and throughout the nation where it's focused on MSA, state and tribal communities. So how is the MSA process and focus different from maybe the others, say the tribes or the state effort going on currently? And where should maybe communities focus on the regional efforts versus maybe a state effort when looking at these coalitions and other opportunities to do partnering, to build partnerships?
Well,
Michelle,
go
go
ahead,
ahead.
Jay.
Well, I'll just say really quickly that, one of the beauties, I think, of this grant program is we get to really make this our own for our area. So we'll definitely align with and coordinate with our partners in the Triangle, MSA, for example, as well as at the state level. But they're really going to be focusing on those geographies they cover. So for the state, that will be outside of our MSA. So it's really going to fall to all of us to develop and design the ideas and ultimately the plans and proposals that go in for implementation funding that will best fit our needs. So I think that's just one broader takeaway, is that we get to kind of control our own destiny to a great degree. Michelle, what were you going to add?
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, due to the geography, the state's plan will obviously be much higher level in terms of the detail that they can get into about specific community or regional, sub-regional needs. I'm so glad that Commissioner Powell mentioned Connect Our Future, because that was a EPA, USDOT, and HUD jointly funded program. But because of those three, agencies coming together, The outcomes are topics that all three agencies really supported. And this work really builds on that. So it does not leave that behind. It builds on that, takes it to the next level. And so we will not be leaving that behind. And we will, I think, be a stronger region for it in terms of an implementation grant because of that work that has been done. And it's, even though we may not call it climate planning or sustainability, it is just that. And in the long term, it is building healthy communities, which we're all supportive of. So I don't know exactly what the state's plan is going to look at. I would imagine it would, be looking at some of those state building facilities. They own a lot of buildings. So if you think about just the efficiencies in buildings and what the state can actually accomplish through just that one measure of thinking about, how they can have energy efficiency buildings and all the institutions across the state. It's I'm thinking they will probably head in that direction. Probably will not get into as much of, they don't really do a lot of on the ground transportation. DOT will certainly be involved, but I just haven't heard that that's going to be a strong collaborative effort on those two agencies.
Thank you. And on that note, I'm going to do a last call of questions from the audience, but also kind of take this opportunity to open the floor to our panelists for any questions they might have for the audience on the work that they're doing.
Megan, I'll just throw out or be interested to hear from anybody if they have thoughts on best ways to get involved that they've heard about, the form being, that could be submitted. Obviously reaching out to our staff in the near term, and then over time, we can be sure to, we'll be having some more engagement activities. So some of those elements were outlined. Are there specific thoughts anyone has about, it would really be helpful if I had this, information or certain ways how to plug in more easily to what we're doing, that kind of thing. I'd love to hear those ideas.
And for those in the audience, feel free to, turn your mics on and share with the group, or you can also drop any ideas you have in the chat as well.
Small communities submit, like we have a prepared plan for a pedestrian plan, for instance. I mean, it's a detailed plan that without cost associated with it. I mean, if there are no costs, those costs have to be presented with a plan, or how does that work?
So a single community could submit their own application, yes. Alternatively, the community could coordinate maybe with what we refer to on the slides as a coalition proposal. So either way, a budget would need to be developed. So some understanding of cost. I think that was somewhere around 45 points of the 250 point rating system that they have. So certainly would need to know the budget anticipated. I will say, I didn't mention it, but there's no cost share requirement for this grant. So that's kind of an interesting twist compared to a lot of federal grants that might be worth considering. Did that answer the question?
It does. I guess that plan was developed in 2018. Is that too old?
I've not seen a restriction on timing or date. So I think if there can be a justification or linkage in the narrative to, it still being applicable and appropriate. Obviously, if it further goes on to have maybe some impact on low income, disadvantaged communities, better connecting the community, those sorts of things, all the better. So I think, yeah, I don't see a problem with the 2018 date at all.
I don't mean to belabor this, but if they, charging stations and solar and everything seem more high priority than pedestrian transportation. And I'm wondering, even though we don't have a plan, we'd be better off to try to scrap something together. I work with 3 small communities on trails and pedestrian stuff mostly, but I'm just wondering if we have colleges that don't, a college that doesn't have energy efficient buildings. We have and no charging stations at all in our area, that kind of stuff. I mean, will those be higher priority?
So they're all eligible activities, generally speaking. Obviously, the case needs to be made how it can score, to the scoring criteria. So tying the idea to the scoring criteria. But yeah, they're all eligible activities. I think what's really going to emerge as we all get our ideas kind of put into the ring is is there any shared concept, 1 or 2 or 3 themes, and then it just makes sense as a region we, kind of rally around that? Or is it a bit of, we've got dozens of ideas and we've figured out a way to get all those ideas incorporated into a proposal. So that's all part of the next several months. That'll need to happen. So for now, that's a big reason for that form submittal, is just to kind of harvest the ideas, understand those interests. So, you mentioned 3 or 4, I think, discrete ideas just now. Maybe putting in a different submittal for each, if you're so inclined, but certainly calling those out is going to be helpful.
Thank you.
I will just also add to that, it's with you working with the 3 communities, that might be a way for you to kind of look at more of a coalition building too with that, to kind of get a little more focus on all 3 of them instead of each one of them individually. That might be a starting off point to kind of maybe pull other smaller areas like you, and to build off kind of how Michelle and Jason have touched on that earlier today, but just bringing it back to the forefront here in this conversation.
I guess I'm in one of those counties, Stanley County, that's on, you mentioned that the focus will be more transportation. Is that right?
It's not necessarily got to be. We do know we included Stanley because as part of the Rocky River RPO and the conversations that they have. But yeah, I think we're still at the early stages. We're kind of open to what are those most pressing needs that folks are trying to get accomplished. We anticipate transportation being a big one, whether it be sidewalks and that kind of transportation, walking and biking, trails, or even other types of modes and technologies.
Thank you.
Certainly.
All right. I want to thank everyone for their questions and this great conversation with the panelists. We're going to move on to wrapping up. So please feel free to reach out if you have any additional questions that pop up as you kind of digest all this information. I know there was a lot talked about today, a lot of different pieces, a lot of deadlines. So as you guys go back and kind of digest all that information, please feel free to reach out to us. And on that, just another reminder about the survey link. Please fill that out, preferably sooner than later, so we can ensure that those pieces are already getting kind of mixed in as we start this plan development process, because March 1st is going to be here before we know it. Additionally, AICP credit information that will be emailed to you guys post this meeting to give you guys the ability to go for the 1.5 credit there. And then additionally, we have another Centralina Learns coming up. It will be in December, and it's on AI and ethics for planners. It's going to be a very interesting and hot topic that is currently in the planning community. And on that, I just want to thank everyone again for joining us today and all your questions in the discussion. It was really great to also be able to have some time to hear from you all as well. So thank you all again.